Hey everyone, welcome to our second episode of On the Road with RMT. We've got a very special guest with us today, Chris Evers. Chris, thanks for taking the time to join us. Always a pleasure. I know a lot of the folks that are watching probably know you, seeing as how you're at every conference everywhere across the country, but for those that don't, can you give us a little background?
Sure, thanks for having me, Candler. And yeah, it's kind of a background that I would say meanders a little bit. I'm originally from Wichita, Kansas, and went to college at Oklahoma State University, and then proceeded south, ended up in Texas working for an asphalt supplier named Koch Materials Company. And at the time, I really came out of college, didn't really know how to spell asphalt, didn't certainly have any, design, a grand design on getting into the, asphalt world and construction, public works, those kinds of things. But life takes interesting turns, and so I would say, starting in the, mid 90s, started getting into the asphalt supply, and really early on was on the pavement preservation side. Just from the beginning, I really cut my teeth in chip seals, so would do a lot of chip seals, and in Texas, that was a primary mode of pavement preservation. They spent quite a bit of their budgets, even from Texas DOT all the way to cities and counties, doing a lot of chip seal. So we spent a lot of time working on that, and then from there really just continued to become more adept at working with cities and counties. They were my primary clientele, and so we did microsurfacing, crack sealing, and just began to really get more accustomed to pavement preservation strategies. And then from there moved to Florida in 2000, late 2000 during the election. Actually, it's pretty interesting. So and then arrived here and really got going and was working for a contractor actually from that point on. And so started on more pavement preservation, so was doing quite a bit with cold in place recycling, full depth reclamation. And so by the time this is kind of meandering through into the early 2000s, I've now been pretty much exposed to every pavement preservation strategy there is. So, from there, it just was a natural extension. I began, to get more involved in American Public Works Association and FACERS, the Florida Association of County Engineers and Road Superintendents. And so it began this, what's now a 30-year career that's meandered through the roads, as they say, and ended up here speaking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you're with PTI. Tell us a little bit about PTI and the work you do with those guys.
Yes, absolutely. So Pavement Technology Inc. is a company that was founded by Colin Durante and his father, Mike Durante, in 1972. And they really kind of are the founding fathers, really were founding fathers of pavement preservation, specifically the top of the curve, and focused on asphalt rejuvenation, specifically a product called Reclamite. And so what started that company was during the energy crisis, pavement preservation really wasn't a thing at all. It was just, hey, asphalt has gotten extremely expensive now with the oil embargo and those kinds of things. And so everyone had to figure out, maybe we should just preserve this asset. And so that really began, a lot of these processes from the early days. And then, they've built the company up. And so I started with them in 2012. And then, now cover a lot of Florida, and then I meander around, I'm using that word a lot, wander the country, and cover, states like Texas and California and Colorado and Arizona and District of Columbia, just kind of all over the place, really helping folks learn more about the newer technologies like photocatalytic pavement preservation treatments, and that is using titanium dioxide. And so that's what we do. We're really focused on that very top of the curve from, I would say, 80 PCI and higher, whether it be the whole road or longitudinal joints or rumble strips, anything related to putting back the light ends in the asphalt binder that are lost to oxidation. Which we get some up in Florida, so we focus on it quite a bit.
Just a little bit, a few UV rays down
there,
right?
UV rays, yep, absolutely. Sunscreen for roads, we get that a lot. So, like change the oil in your car. So all those adages, we hear them, they roll off of our tongues all the time, but they're adages for a reason. They really are true for the most part. They are good analogies and good things to use, and I actually don't shy away from it. I'll tell folks, hey, speak to your elected officials with those kinds of terms, and talk to them about the proverbial toolbox and the hammer and all that stuff that people get tired of hearing me say.
Certainly.
So it's fun. It's something that I'm passionate about. I do a lot of educating. I answer a lot of phone calls and emails, asking questions that kind of range all over the pavement world. But I would say as many questions, and this is interesting, I think would be for you as well, is that as many of the questions are about the pavement management side and the pavement inventory. It's something that they intuitively know that they're really underutilizing, I would say, and they have this feeling that they need to get in the game a little bit better as far as that's concerned. So I field a lot of questions on that too, not just the treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, Chris, you got a 30-year career in pavement preservation. Let's talk a little bit about how has pavement preservation evolved over this 30-year timeline, and not just the different treatments that are available, but obviously what's the adoption looked like over the last 30 years, and people seem to be coming to preservation and seeing that it is the only path forward.
Yes, it's a great point, and I think obviously I've had the ability to look back over these decades and see where it's come, and it's in a way it's exciting. In a way it can kind of be a little bit frustrating too, because I think all of us in the business would like to see its adoption be just completely wide scale and turn into something where everyone does it. So we're not there yet, but we have made really promising strides, and I would say that. To people who may not have really gotten into it yet at all, the interesting thing is that over my 30-year career, there's been very few new processes. Some of these, stalwarts of the pavement preservation curve where we put all these processes, some of them are 100 years old. Some of them are older than that. Some of them have been around for 60, 70 years. So, when I hear people say, hey, we're going to try something new, and then they throw out one of these processes, I sometimes want to remind them, that actually was from 1959.
Right.
So it's not exactly new, but we're excited it's new for them, and it's something that they do need to, I think, feel comfortable with to really deploy it at scale in their own agencies.
Yeah.
So it's important, but to your point, there have been a lot of advancements. I would say equipment is much more advanced. We have computers that obviously can help us apply these materials in a more effective way, more accurate way, a much more reliable material sciences. So we've dialed in like mixed designs. We've improved the ability to get a, I would say, frequent good result where we're not kind of shooting from the hip, where it's like that looks like a 0.08. Let's just roll with it. We know for sure. We can measure these things. Quality control, quality assurance has gotten better too. We have more testing, that's available. There's performance specifications that we've adopted, and so you've got this ability as a consumer, as a user of these processes, to have much higher level of confidence that it's going to work. And if it's, high confidence it's going to work, you're going to likely use it instead of, wondering, okay, if this is a 50-50 shot, do I really want to take that risk? Because after all, that risk aversion is sometimes the biggest obstacle to these, say, city engineers, public works directors, county engineers trying something new.
Absolutely. So, for our listeners here, right, especially on the leadership side, there's historically been these barriers to entry, right, which have been, the trust and the ability to go inventory the network, the trust in the actual performance of the different treatments that are going to be done. With all the tools that you mentioned, right, we have the ability to monitor road networks now, monitor the performance results. There's been enough testing, and like you said, these treatments have been around for 50 plus years.
Yep.
Right? I think that what that sounds like it's translating to is a much higher degree of confidence and much lower barrier of entry to get into the preservation game, if
Definitely.
you will. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I would say that if you're getting started and you haven't done any of these processes, or maybe you haven't really even done a pavement inventory before, the thing is, we have never been at a point in time where you have more advantages and more abilities to quickly get these questions answered. It's the most overused, two letters in the alphabet right now, A and I. So everyone talks about it, but it really does end up being a game changer for people who are interested in trying something new. Not to say we're going to trust what you find online 100%, because that would be a bad idea. But I will say that you can do your research quite easily. You can proof some things before you go out and make a big commitment, on a road project or with new software or something. So the idea that there are, I would say, more capabilities and technologies to bear than ever before for the decision makers in the pavement space. And so that's very important, and I think that's also an advancement. Sometimes the biggest advancements don't end up being on the actual construction of the project, right? So it's how we're measuring the road and how we're determining what we're going to do to that road.
Right.
We always have I would say our overarching preservation theme is put the right treatment on the right road at the right time. So you really want those three rights. And so you have that, you're going to have a successful project. If you're missing one of those components, then you're going to be challenged.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're seeing is with a lot of the technology, which has really affected how we handle managing our pavements and our assets, the ability to go get that big data, like a lot of data sets, a lot of information, gives them the higher confidence level that they're going to get the right time. Because as we all know, if you're just looking at a road and you're just measuring its condition every 3, 4, 5 years, how are you going to get that right time? And the preservation treatment is really, you can miss an entire window in 3, 4, 5 years. You're just the road's great, and then the next time you check in on it, you're like, whoa, there goes. And the problem is that first window you miss is always the least expensive treatment. Okay?
And the highest return on investment.
The highest return on investment. And so, what we really encourage people to do is, it doesn't matter if you could have a full network of roads that are just practically new. It's so important to begin to measure the condition of the asset.
Yep.
If you're not doing that, you're missing a tremendous opportunity to make the math work in your favor. And I suspect we'll talk a little bit about math today, because it's a pretty important component. I hated it in school, but it's my best friend now, because really right now it's the only way that some of these agencies can bridge the gap is turning the math into something that's in their favor. And the only way to do that is with data and getting those rights dialed in and making sure that you are doing the right thing when you go out there and do it.
Certainly, we talk about measuring the network often, right? And the way that I feel like a lot of people think about that is measuring cost. And when we think about cost, I think that what a lot of people associate that to is what are we going to go spend on this network, or on overlays or on different preservation treatments. But what gets missed in that is the opportunity cost. And when you talk about missing that opportunity for a preservation treatment in a road's life cycle, that can be the most expensive thing. And I don't think everybody has great visibility on the opportunity costs that they're missing with preservation.
It's huge. And really, I like to tilt that, and turn that into, invest. Because if they look at that, to your point with the return on investment, you really should look at this as a basket of stocks. It's your portfolio for your retirement. And so if you want to be able to allow your roads to retire in style and look good doing it, you probably want to make sure that you're investing in, the things that are going to make that happen. And so first and foremost, you have to have the information that's going to lead you to make the right decisions. And to do that, you have to have a robust system that anybody that is working for your agency can be plugged into that and to pick up the ball and run with it. Because I think the other thing that we miss is with the opportunity cost. It's not only the opportunity cost of missing one of the windows, but it's also, what if one of your most knowledgeable pavement managers leaves? And so what does that do to your agency And what does that do to the decision tree that your agency's using to make these really important, decisions on your pavement network?
Right.
And so that opportunity cost is one of the, primary things. I think, there's a lot of different, calculations they should be able to make. We talk a lot about, remaining asset value. We talk about remaining service life. We talk about replacement cost. We talk about return on investment. And I think it's important for the decision makers to understand what those terms are and how they play a part. And they should have an asset management, plan or a program that helps them calculate that. Yep. Because if all I get is kind of the grades, the A, B, C, D, F, then it's really not telling me, though, what I need to do with the C or the A or the F, or it's just leaving me with a score. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that I think people are challenged by is not only the data that's, I would say, talked about the most, that score of 0 to 100, but it is individual decisions that need to be made on a project level, on a street by street level. Okay. And so, if you're looking at a network, plan, if you will, if you're looking at a pavement management plan, then being able to dial in, zoom out, because that information is important for different reasons. So you'll have to make sure the elected officials know what their overarching, condition of the network is, but you also need to be able to, respond to residents if they ask, what's going on with my road and when can I expect it to be, upgraded or fixed or, rehabilitated or preserved. And so something that gives you that ability is very important. And I think a lot of agencies are still missing that, even as advanced as we are and how, available these resources are.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in a constantly changing environment, right? And that happens really for the agencies, if you will. Yep. And we know that budgets change on a daily basis, right? And agility has to be a really important piece for them to be agile in adjusting to those changes in budget constraints, right?
Oh yeah.
Obviously a hot topic right now.
We were going there.
Exactly. We knew we were going there. Hot topic right now in Florida, right? Everybody's talking about the potential of the elimination of the property tax. And so, I think that there's a big expectation for that to change budgets. How does that change the landscape for the municipalities that are going to deal with this, the cities and the counties? How does that change the landscape for those guys with those varying budgets?
It should, I would say, be an absolute magnitude, high order magnitude event for them. Mm-hmm. I mean, it should be a EF5 tornado and a Cat 5 hurricane, all the things that we hate, hitting at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's something that is, I think, potential for almost like a black swan event, meaning we think of that as like a storm that impacts us, but there are resources to help recover from a storm. Mm-hmm. When it's self-inflicted, meaning you have elected officials that are making these decisions and kind of overruling home rule and basically creating this budget crisis. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that it's not happening in a vacuum either. It's we already have declining gas tax revenue. We already have the electrification of the transportation. We already have something that I think is under appreciated, and at the same time something that I would say has the massive impact that is the shift from everybody drives their own cars to more transportation as a service. Mm-hmm. Where you have the Waymos or the Teslas or any of these self-driving vehicles. So, but those are all electric. And so, we're looking at a property tax hit is going to be significant, mm-hmm. but then you've got the drip of the reduction in gas tax revenue, and then you have the inflationary pressures, and so all of these things are happening now. And so if one thing doesn't get you, you're going to have to be prepared for the other. But they're all here. They're all coming. And so it's really, I think, necessitating a pretty substantial pivot. Mm-hmm. If you're sitting here watching us right now, and you are I would say, entrenched in just a standard, what we call worst first, or just a standard mill and resurface, the math just is not going to work anymore. You may have been able to get through it, but we're in a situation, and I, talk to these public works directors frequently. They're really freaked out, honestly. And so, what should, kind of be the wake up call? It's going to be interesting to see if it actually happens that way. If they, some of the folks. Now, that's not to say we don't have some people in Florida that do a great job.
Yeah,
we know them. They're always out front. They're I would say have adopted best practices. They deploy a number of different pavement preservation treatments up and down their tree, and they are kind of locked in. But then there's others that just haven't moved off of zero. They just haven't gotten moving yet. And so I think this is the time. So this should be, the flag in the ground moment where we take a stand and we say, look, everyone should be, I would say doing these processes. And again, you have to have more in your toolbox than just one tool.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we really kind of, I'd say, have an opportunity here is, we talk about it all the time. Well, that person's a pavement preservation expert. It's kind of like right now everybody's an AI expert, right? But before long, AI is just going to be so, entrenched that no one's going to talk about you're an AI expert. You have to be an AI expert. You have to know AI. And so the same thing should be for pavements, is that you can't really be a pavement expert unless you know how to deploy pavement preservation.
Certainly.
And you can't be, an asset manager if you're managing your asset with one tool.
Right.
I mean, management, that implies that you're, doing something to move the needle and move the chess pieces around. But if you're down to one chess piece, it's pretty hard to win. Right?
If all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
That pawn gets a little lonely when it's by itself on the board,
Certainly.
So it moves slower, and so you really need that force multiplier of these, pavement management tools and these, advanced inventory technologies, and the ability to take that and generate an engine that will drive you forward by using that data to make the best decisions you possibly can in the field. And if you don't do that, I am, really here to be the bearer of bad news. And it is just, we can't make it work.
Right.
The math just does not work. I spend a ton of my time, advocating that. That's what I do with Florida Pavement Preservation Council, kind of my role with that. And we talk about it constantly. And it's one of the biggest things people ask about is, how do we fix funding? How do we, get more money? And right now, there is no answer for that. So the only way you can get more money is to get creative and to come, to the realization that you're going to have to use all of these tools. Yeah. And so, people ask us, are you concerned about how this is going to affect your business? And my answer, is universally very concerned, because I honestly don't know how we'll get all the work done, because I think you're going to see this just massive shift out of necessity. They have to, and if they don't make that shift, they're going to be left with really dire consequences, and they're not going to. And then the other thing is they're going to be competing with the other agencies that are making that shift. You have at RMT you have finite resources to meet the needs of the clients out there, and if everyone picked up the phone and called you at one time, it'd be a great day. I'd be busy, but at some point, just like us, we have bandwidth and we have to worry about that, and so that's generally what concerns me too.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's only so many contractors to do the work that is available. Yep. And I think that you're right. I think that we are about to witness a big shift in this industry towards that preservation, and I think that that's a part of really two pieces, right? Number one, out of necessity because of these continued budget constraints, right? And that's not going away, right? Nope. We can probably expect them to continue to constrict, right? So that's going to absolutely be pushing everybody towards preservation, but also with the tools available to these agencies now, they can move forward with confidence from step one, right? And it's, it's one of the things that I've heard you say before, right? You don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started in order to be great, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. And if you don't know how to get started, the best part about this state, I would say, and you and I both work in many, many states, so this is not unique to Florida. Obviously, the property tax situation is a bit unique, but other states are also going through their own, pains. So if you're in another state and you're in a situation, it may not look exactly like Florida, but roads deteriorate in, somewhat standard fashion. Some roads, we're looking at dominant distresses, and we talk about, why a road would deteriorate. And you might have freeze thaw, which we don't have in Florida, which is great, but there's a lot of different mechanisms behind it, but the funding is universal. No one that I've knocked on a door and talked to says, great news, we're totally flush with cash, we're loaded to the hill, we can do whatever we want.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. And so when that's the case, it means that we have to do more with less. And the way to do that is with intelligence, and understanding, and having the most information about your roadway network to where you can read it like a tea leaf. And we talk a lot about, at FPPC we do a lot of preaching that you've got these different buckets of how sophisticated you are. And so we talk about corrective maintenance, we talk about proactive, which is a little bit better, and then we talk about predictive. And that predictive is like nirvana for us in the preservation space. And so having the tool like their pavement management plan to fall back on and be predictive about what their roads are going to do, and that's what I really love about the success that you're having at RMT. You all have a platform that gives them that predictive capability. And understand that future is so key, because that is the way that they can actually bend the math in their favor. And it's about the only way now.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we really wanted to focus on the RMT side was, this is an evolving environment for each and every one of these agencies. How do we deliver a product that doesn't render itself, we'll say, useless in the event that we have a change in available budget? It needs to be a tool to address that problem, not lose its value. And so that's why we want that continuous data, and also a platform where you can just simply adjust your available budget and it will automatically show you exactly what you may or may not want to pull out of your road plan.
It's huge, and I think it's a help to the contractors like ourselves when we are working with an RMT client. The ability to share that platform information and be able to build out their program. It's very important that the longer it takes us to really help them decide which roads they're going to treat, the longer it is before those roads are able to get their life-saving treatments, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I kind of one of my shticks is that I say, in the United States, hundreds of thousands of roads die prematurely every year. They don't have to die. Like, we can save these roads.
Certainly.
And so to do that, we have to know the health of the patient. And how do we do that? We do that through, going to the proverbial doctor and, understanding that this road might be deteriorating much more rapidly. It has an underlying health condition, right? And so we want to catch that road at the right time. And but if we're just measuring it once every 3, 4, 5 years, it becomes much more difficult to catch it in time. And so that's the strategy that I have really appreciated with the platform is being able to work with clients who are on the RMT platform and see that they have that level of predictability of their roadway network in a way that they didn't have before. Absolutely. They can see it moving. It's a living, breathing thing, which is funny to hear us talk about roads in that way. But to the casual observer, they just sit there for 20 years. But to you and I, and to the folks in public works, that's not how it works. I mean, they are ever changing, and so we need to be able to measure that and do so in a way that gives us the best intel to make the right decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And and with that ever-changing comment, right? Which roads are deteriorating faster? Having the visibility on that to stop the bleeding where it matters the most is critically important, especially when we're talking about constrained budgets and budget efficiency, right?
We preach that all the time. The FPPC webinars that we do, the recorded webinars, and the amount of time and the questions that we get from participants is always heavily tilted towards, how do I know when the right time is, and how do I know what the road is telling me to do? And so, there is this, science behind it, this distress analysis, and these specific distresses tell us, what's going on with that road. We don't have to completely guess. We also don't have to rip the road up and do exhaustive, in-depth testing either. They do telegraph what they're going through. And so, if we can get in there and read those distresses when they appear instead of 3 years after they've appeared, there's a real value to that. And that means that the agency's going to be able to deploy strategies that are quite a bit cheaper. Because the steps go, like you might have at the top of the curve, it might be $1.25. That next treatment might be $5 or $6 a square yard, and then that next treatment might be $8, and then 15 and 25. Like it gets worse quickly. And it's not linear. It's very problematic for budgets. And so I think the key is that if agencies will focus on, let me make sure that I have proper intel. Let me make sure that I have that ground truthing that's going on these pavements to know when I need to do what, and then just understand that let me have all these tools in my toolbox. And if you don't feel comfortable for procurement reasons, there's piggybacking options available. There's other neighbors that you have that probably are using that. So there's really no good excuse now to really, I would say, not do these things. And so, when people ask me, okay, what do I do first? The first thing is, you don't just go out there and start, aggressive chemotherapy when you don't know if you have cancer.
Right.
So you probably want to make sure you understand what's going on with that roadway network.
Chris, one of the things that we've talked about, and I know that we're kind of a broken record here on the constrained budget side, but we talk to agencies, and oftentimes with a constrained budget, they're really concerned about spending any funds on anything that's not material on road, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, they don't have the information that they need to prove why they need more available funds, or the scenario builder to say this is what happens if we don't spend X on Y. Talk a little bit more about that, and how often do you see that?
All the time, Candler. And it's really can be a source of frustration because I think, what the misconception is that the elected officials won't really get it, and that, that they just, live in a bubble too. A lot of, council members or, commissioners are business people. So if you put it in the analogies that they'll understand, they get it. I think, when I hear of I would say reluctance to spend money on, and it can be the same for the pavement management plan, the inventory, or even in the field, well, we don't want to test anything because the testing costs are high. And it's like, what are the costs of not testing? If you have a road that, let's say you just didn't check density on, or you didn't, collect any of the information, as the asphalt is being delivered to the paver, and you didn't even know what the temperature was, and they just laid it down and just, went about their business. You'll notice really quickly that road is not going to, have the life cycle that you expected to get. So, is that really cheaper? Are you really getting a cheaper overall network out of that attitude, or would you be best served to go and spend that money up front? It's an investment. It's an investment in understanding what is going to be most effective for your roadway network, because no two roadway networks are the same, and no two periods of time are even the same. So, it could be city A, at this snapshot in time looks vastly different than 5 years from now or 5 years before. And so not having that information it costs more money. And just explaining that in terms that make sense to elected officials is one of the key jobs of a public works director or a city or county engineer. That is your job, to find out what the makeup of the city council or the county commission are. And sometimes you need to know what's their profession. I mean, I remember speaking to, a city council, and I didn't know this. It's sometimes better to be lucky than good. But one of the councilwoman, she and her husband owned a car dealership, and I was using the analogy of changing the oil in your brand new Corvette. Well, they owned a Chevy dealership, so she understood that it would be absolutely ridiculous to sell a brand new Corvette, which is the cost of a lane mile of resurfacing, and then never change the oil on that car. So, I bring up the analogy, she starts laughing, which usually is not a good sign, right? but then she says, no, I'm laughing because of this, and then we all had a good laugh. And the rejuvenation program passed unanimously. Yep. So don't make that assumption that I think we sometimes make because we are conservative, or we have a risk aversion, or we don't want to be wrong in front of commissioners or our bosses. And so don't make that assumption that they're just not going to understand it. You need to present the material, and if at first it fails, then you need to present the material the next year. And so that is the key.
Yeah, and Chris, I think another key piece there is being able to present the data, the quantifiable data, right? We don't have to guess anymore. With Reclamite as an example, we've done a number of different studies on Reclamite. It works.
It does.
It is a proven process. It works. We can guarantee a return on investment out of applying that to, especially to any roads early in their life cycle, and any agency out there that is not getting on board with that and ahead of the curve they're just leaving money on the table.
Yes, definitely. And specifically, I mean, you bring that up, and I think that's what is so powerful about the RMT program is you have done your own, kind of ground truthing of different preservation treatments. So you've looked at, you bring up Reclamite, you've looked at that and been able to show not only what the roads look like visually over time after one treatment, two treatments, whatever, but you've also been able to show what that looks like as far as life extension and what that looks like as far as return on investment. And I think that data is so valuable because oftentimes our elected officials are business people. They are folks that are going to gravitate towards that return on investment. They may not really understand the design life of asphalt. By the way, the 20-year design life of asphalt is a complete fallacy. It doesn't exist because there's no perfect 20-year, this asphalt road's going to last 20 years. There's so many different variables. Some of them last 22 years, some of them last 14. And, with preservation, they can last much, much longer as well. So it doesn't mean that we are resigned to the fact that these pavements have to fit in this box and last only this long. And so but you have to know the data behind that road and make sure you're selecting the winners. What I think is important too is that for some reason, oftentimes the agency will look at a road and they'll see that, gosh, this road maybe carries a lot of traffic or something's going on with it, and so they sink a lot of money into it, and it's just constantly a problem child. And so they are chasing the trade, if you will, if you're looking at investing, and a lot of times that's a really bad way to invest money, right? Right. Right. As soon as oh man, this thing's going great, and you buy high and sell low, right? Right. This is investment advice. So the important thing is that we know how to get around that with the data. We know which are the winners and which are the losers, if you will. Meaning, maybe this road we need to defer treatment on it because it's rapidly declining. And so if we did put something on it that's preservative, and we're measuring this now with weekly data points instead of every 3 or 4 years, we can see that trend. And I think the trend analysis is so important, that it's something that we've never had in this business really. We had to count on our eyeballs, and the I would say pavement manager maybe in the field who has just been around for 30 years and can go out there and, well, he knows or she knows everything about this road,
Yep.
and it's always been a problem. But now we have obviously a lot of turnover in cities and counties and DOTs even. And so now we have to count on that data and be able to track that and visually see when there's a road that is flagged, it's got a problem. And that technology is now here, and I think when people really start using it the right way and understand it, it really moves the conversation to, okay, we can be successful even with some of the declining revenue, but not without the data.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they are completely flying blind.
Yep.
And that's just a really difficult way to operate,
Right.
Especially in this environment. And I think the other thing is it really makes it unforgiving if you're doing that, because we already are treating these, I would say, preservation treatments as throw them out with the bathwater if they don't work.
Yep.
And so if you do put them in the wrong place and they're not going to work because they're not able to work, that's going to penalize the person who made that decision, but it's also going to penalize that treatment unfairly. So before you really dive into, let me deploy all these different treatments, Chris told me I need to have 10 tools in my toolbox, probably want to measure once, measure twice, cut once,
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So to do that, you need to have an adequate pavement condition inventory and understand what your scores are. And you need to be able to, I think, if I had to look at a public works director or a city or county engineer and really define a successful role like that, it would be to know their numbers. They ought to be able to rattle off of the top of their head, if they get stopped by an elected official, hey, what's our overall PCI? Not that the commissioner might know that, but what is our overall network rating? We're at 73, and we have designs for getting to 80. That's our benchmark, and there should be goals in place, and they should know what their resurfacing cycle is. I remember meeting an agency in the Panhandle that'll remain nameless, and we looked at the numbers, and they didn't know, but I calculated it through kind of back of the napkin math, and I was like, you're on a 130-year paving cycle. So in start date 2130, you're going to have to tell Mrs. Smith that that's going to be when her road's going to get redone. So that does not instill a lot of confidence from your citizens.
Certainly not.
So that, and it doesn't have to happen. We can be this a predictive version of our current self.
Certainly.
And that should be the aspiration, is to have that data and be able to supply that to whoever's asking for it. Absolutely. It's transparency, I think, in having that information and being able to share that with citizens and residents too.
Yeah.
They're the taxpayers. They're the one footing the bill.
Absolutely.
So,
Chris, I agree with you 100% on the transparency, and I think that's kind of the overall sentiment from our conversation today, is that the landscape has absolutely evolved to a point now where these tools are available, and these agencies shouldn't be scared to go dive into preservation.
Yeah, definitely. There's no need to fear any of these tools. They're here for your benefit. They're here for the benefit of your agency. And I think the key here is that just understand that you don't live on an island. This is not something that has never been done before. And all of these things, really exist for the betterment of your community. And it is your legacy as that decision maker to make the call to deploy these technologies, whether it be on the measurement side or whether it be on the tool side. Both go hand in hand. You can't really be effective with only one side of it. And so, as we kind of leave the audience, I think the key is to understand that, just make the call. Don't feel like you're alone. There are a lot of agencies who are already in the game, doing a good job. And so, count on them. This is public work, so we're all family anyway, right?
Right.
So we're here to help each other and we're here to go out there and really make this place a better place for the next generations.
Absolutely. Chris, thanks so much for
Absolutely,
joining us
Candler.
today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. I'm throwing clickbait out there. I'm chumming the water with all kinds of shit.
Yeah, little hooks.
Little hooks.
Yeah,
some
I got
clickbait.
hooks all over, man. It looks like barbed wire. We're fishing with dynamite.
Fishing with dynamite.
Candler and Chris fishing with dynamite. These are outtakes, brother.
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
Are outtakes. Yeah, we're going with the outtakes.